What if the one moment you try to avoid people is the exact moment someone needs you the most? That was the question that hit Jackson Cole the day everything changed. The summer sun in Montana Territory was unforgiving, turning Paradise Valley into a brittle and thirsty land. For 3 long months, not a single drop of rain had blessed the ground. Dust clung to every fence post, every porch rail, every breath. Jackson rode along the edge of his ranch, the Triple C, scanning the dry land with eyes that looked older than 26. He wore a worn hat pulled low over his thick brown hair, his jaw shadowed by a day's stubble. His body was strong, shaped by years of cattle work, but there was a heaviness in the way he held himself. His father used to ride beside him through these same pastures. Now Jackson rode alone. A man stands alone in this wilderness. That was what he told himself every morning. Ever since the night outlaws raided his family's homestead and left him the only one alive, his father, his mother, his younger sister, all gone before the fire even cooled. From that night on, Jackson believed one thing with absolute certainty. Attachment was weakness. The West was too cruel for soft hearts. So he worked, kept to himself, and spoke only when needed. The Triple C was his duty. Survival was his truth. He never expected anything to pull him from that path. But then he heard it. A gunshot, sharp, echoing across the valley like a warning from the heavens. Jackson tensed. His hand moved to grab the Winchester in his saddle holster. He scanned the shimmering horizon, where heat waves blurred everything in a wavering haze. Another shot. Then another. A wagon was under attack on the main road. "Just what I don't need," Jackson muttered, but his hands were already tightening on the reins. His horse, Bullet, charged forward. Dust exploded behind them as they raced across the dry ground. Jackson didn't like stepping into anyone's trouble, but something deep inside, something he kept buried, pushed him forward. As he closed the distance, the scene sharpened into focus. A small wagon rattled down the road. 3 riders circled it, firing at the driver. Jackson's stomach tightened when he saw who held the shotgun. A woman. Young, terrified, fighting back with everything she had. One rider fell as Jackson drew near. Whether from her shot or from luck, he didn't know. Jackson fired a warning shot into the air. The remaining attackers cursed and rode off toward the hills. The valley fell into uneasy silence. Jackson slowed Bullet and approached with caution. He kept his rifle ready. Trouble often came with tags he couldn't see. "Are you injured, ma'am?" he asked, stopping a few feet away. The woman lowered her shotgun, but her hands shook. Her face was flushed from fear and sun. Golden hair, messy and half fallen from its pins, framed her face. Her blue dress was covered in trail dust, but something about her looked refined, almost like she belonged anywhere except the harsh Montana land. "No," she said, catching her breath, "thanks to you." There was bravery in her voice even though she trembled. "Those men have been following me since Helena. I thought I lost them yesterday." Jackson tipped his hat politely. "Jackson Cole, my ranch is close by." She nodded, steadying herself. "Tabitha James, I was headed to Willow Creek, or I was trying to." Her gaze dropped to her wagon's cracked wheel. "What brings you to these parts alone?" Jackson asked. His words were cautious. Strangers meant complications, and complications meant danger. Her eyes shone with grief. "My brother sent for me months ago. He wanted me to help with his newspaper in Willow Creek, but when I reached Helena, I learned he had died of fever." A quiet ache moved through Jackson. Loss recognized loss. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "So am I," she whispered. Tabitha looked at the broken wheel, at the empty road, at the dry land stretching in every direction. "Misfortune seems to follow me," she added softly. Jackson looked toward the hills. The men could return. Leaving her alone here wasn't an option. Even if he wanted to stay distant, his father's voice echoed in his mind. "Do what's right, son. My ranch is closer than town. Jackson said. "We can fix your wheel there. You can continue tomorrow." Quote, relief washed over her face like cool water. "I would be grateful." As they traveled toward the Triple C, Jackson kept scanning the horizon for danger. Meanwhile, Tabitha looked at the valley with a mix of wonder and sorrow. She sat straight, composed, even after nearly losing her life. "Who were those men?" Jackson asked. Tabitha clutched her small bag. "My brother was investigating corruption in the territorial government. He wrote to me that he had found something important. I think those men want his documents." Jackson understood now. Trouble always had roots, and hers ran deep. "And you have those papers?" he asked. She nodded. "I plan to finish what he started." Jackson glanced at her. That kind of idealism got folks killed out here, but he couldn't help admiring her courage. They finally reached the Triple C, the ranch buildings rising from the dusty land. Jackson's ranch hands looked up, surprised to see him riding in with a woman. Miguel raised a brow but said nothing. Inside the main house, Mrs. Blackburn set a warm meal on the table. Tabitha looked around, taking in the simple furnishings. "Your ranch is impressive," she said kindly, "especially for a man so young." Jackson shook his head. "It was my father's work. I'm just trying to keep it from falling apart." "I think you're doing more than that," she said softly. For a moment, Jackson didn't know what to say. Later that night, Jackson stepped onto the porch. Thunder rolled across the darkening sky. A storm was finally coming after long, punishing months. He breathed in the cool wind. Then he heard soft footsteps. Tabitha joined him, wrapped in one of Mrs. Blackburn's shawls. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Storm's coming," Jackson said. Lightning lit the clouds. They stood quietly, the air buzzing with more than just the coming rain. "Thank you," Tabitha said suddenly. "Most men would have ridden the other way today." "I wasn't raised to ignore someone in need." Her voice lowered. "Even when it means risking your own safety?" Before Jackson could answer, a ranch hand shouted from the yard, "Riders coming!" Jackson's body tensed. He reached for his rifle. Tabitha stepped back, but her face paled. "They're here for me." Jackson stepped in front of her. "This is my land. Anyone bringing trouble here will answer to me." 5 riders emerged through flashes of lightning, and Jackson recognized the leader immediately. Harlan Wade, a hired gun with no conscience. The storm had arrived, and not just the one in the sky. The storm crashed across the valley as Harlan Wade and his men pulled their horses to a stop. Lightning lit their faces, sharp and dangerous. The wind carried the smell of rain and trouble. Jackson stepped forward with his rifle steady in his hands. Behind him, Tabitha stood on the porch, gripping the shawl tight around her shoulders. "Evening, Cole," Wade called out. His voice was smooth but cold. "Heard you're harboring a lady who's holding items that don't belong to her." "My only guest is a woman traveling to claim her late brother's things," Jackson replied. "If you've got lawful business, you can bring it to the sheriff in the morning." Wade laughed. The sound held no humor. "Lawman ain't part of this. She's coming with us." "You step 1 foot closer," Jackson warned, "and you'll be carried out instead." Miguel and the ranch hands had taken positions behind barrels and fence rails. They were outnumbered, but they stood firm. Rain fell harder, dripping from the brim of Jackson's hat. Then Tabitha stepped forward. "I have copies," she said loudly. "Whatever you think I have. The originals are already with federal marshals." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Lies." "Try me," she said. "My brother didn't die without sending his evidence ahead." The storm cracked open the sky again. For a moment, Wade didn't move. His men shifted nervously behind him. Finally, Wade pulled on his reins. "This ain't over," he spat. "Judge Hawkins wants those papers, and he'll get them." He rode off into the rain, his men following. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did Jackson lower his rifle. His jaw was tight. Tabitha's breath shook as relief washed over her. Inside the house, rainwater dripped from both of them onto the wooden floor. Jackson shut the door and leaned against it, trying to steady himself. "Was that true?" he asked. "About the marshals?" Tabitha hesitated, then gave a small smile. Not yet, but it will be once I reach Fort Benton. You're either shining with courage, Jackson said, or shining with foolishness. Maybe both, she admitted. Jackson studied her, frustration and admiration mixing inside him. She held danger like other women held lace. But she carried it for the sake of others, not herself. That truth shook something deep in him. You've made yourself a target, he said quietly. The target was there the moment my brother started seeking justice. I'm just finishing what he couldn't. That night, thunder rolled across the valley. Jackson couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the storm flood the land with long-awaited rain. Behind him, Tabitha slept in the guest room, unaware of the war he fought inside himself. By morning, mud covered everything. But the air felt new. He didn't waste time. We ride for Fort Benton, Jackson said over breakfast. Today, quote. Tabitha looked up in shock. Jackson, that's 3 days from here. Your ranch. Miguel can manage it, he said. Wade won't stop coming. And I don't trust the sheriff in Willow Creek. But I can't ask you. You're not asking, he said simply. This is my choice. She stared at him for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, something warm and fragile. They set out by noon. Jackson chose the less traveled route north, cutting through open fields instead of the main road. The air was cool, the ground soft under the wheels. As miles passed, something eased between them. They talked around the campfire that night, firelight glowing on their faces. I was a teacher in St. Louis, Tabitha said. My brother said the territory needed people who cared enough to tell the truth. He wasn't wrong, Jackson replied. And you've carried a lot alone. Jackson poked the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. The world took everything from me. I thought caring for anything again was like handing the world a weapon. Is it truly safer? She asked. Or just lonelier? The question cut deeper than she knew. The next evening, danger returned. A gunshot cracked through the twilight. Jackson grabbed Tabitha and pulled her down behind a rock as bullets split the air. 3 men fired from the ridge above their camp. Stay low, Jackson ordered. Gunpowder smoke drifted through the air. Tabitha stayed calm, surprising him again. There's a creek behind us, she whispered. If we reach it, we might escape. On my mark, Jackson said. He fired twice, then grabbed her hand. Together they ran, slipping and sliding through mud and roots until they tumbled into the shallow creek bed. Bullets kicked up dirt around them, but the darkness hid them. They crawled, soaked and cold, until they reached a small cave under a ledge of rock. Inside, Jackson checked her quickly. Are you hurt? No, she said, shivering. Just cold. He wrapped his jacket around her and sat close. This will help keep you warm, he said, his voice low. Thank you. Quote, they sat in the darkness, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of their attackers searching. The silence between them was filled with everything they hadn't said yet. I've been thinking about your words, Jackson said quietly. About facing the frontier together instead of alone. Tabitha turned toward him. Her face was close, her eyes soft, even in the dim light. What are you afraid of losing, Jackson? She asked. He swallowed. Everything, everyone. She reached out, touching his hand gently. Then maybe it's time to stop losing alone. Before he could answer, distant shouts echoed. Their pursuers were still searching. They spent the night taking turns keeping watch, their shared fear, shared warmth, and shared hope wrapped around them like a blanket. At dawn, they moved again. They traveled on foot through open land, heading toward a line shack where Jackson hoped to find horses. They reached it by early afternoon. 2 horses stood in the corral. Fort Benton is hours away, Jackson said. We can make it before dark. Quote, as they rode across the plains, the sun set behind them. Jackson kept stealing glances at Tabitha. Her hair glowed gold in the light, her face steady and brave. He didn't want the journey to end. And deep in his chest, a truth he had fought for years finally took shape. He was falling in love with her. Before he could tell her, Thunder of hooves sounded behind them. Wade and his men raced toward them, cutting them off from the fort. Jackson pulled Tabitha behind the rocks as bullets sparked against stone. "There's 6 of them," she said. "And 2 of us," Jackson replied, "but we have cover." Gunfire raged until dusk. Then new riders approached, blue coats shining in the twilight. "Army patrol," Tabitha whispered. Wade's men fled. Relief washed over them like warm rain. But even as safety arrived, Jackson felt a different fear rising. Fort Benton meant one thing. He would have to say goodbye to her. Fort Benton stood strong against the fading sun, its wooden walls glowing with the last light of day. As the cavalry led them through the gates, Jackson felt safety settle over them, yet inside him, a storm was gathering. The danger that followed Tabitha was lifting, but so was the one thing he had not prepared himself for, the thought of losing her. Inside the commander's office, Tabitha handed over the documents her brother had died protecting. Maps, ledgers, letters, and sworn statements. Proof that Judge Hawkins had been using his power to steal land from honest settlers. The commander leafed through them with growing anger. "This is enough to bring the judge and half his men down," he said. "We'll send marshals out by morning." Tabitha nodded, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days, but Jackson stood back, silent. Her mission was nearly complete. And his part in her life might be ending. That night, the fort was quiet. Soldiers spoke softly around the fire pits. Horses snorted from their stalls. The smell of pine smoke drifted on the cool wind. Jackson found Tabitha standing alone on the fort's western wall, watching the sun melt into the plains. "Commander says we ride with an escort tomorrow," Jackson said gently. "Wade won't risk attacking a military line." "That's good news," she said, though her voice sounded distant. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Tabitha faced him fully. "What happens after tomorrow?" It was a simple question, yet Jackson felt his heart twist. "You'll go back to Willow Creek," he said slowly. "Open the newspaper again, fight for what your brother believed in." "And you?" she asked softly. "I go back to the CCC," he answered. "It's where I belong." They stood quietly for a long moment, the wind brushing between them like a thin wall neither wanted but neither knew how to break. Tabitha turned back to the plains. "I never meant to drag you into my trouble." "You didn't drag me," Jackson said. "I stepped in." "I'd do it again." Her breath caught faintly at his words. The sky dimmed until only the last band of gold remained. Jackson moved closer, unable to stop himself. "Tabitha," he said quietly, "I've been thinking." She looked up at him, waiting. "Willow Creek isn't far from Paradise Valley," he said. "Not for a man who has reason to ride there." Her eyes warmed. "And what reason would that be?" "You," Jackson breathed. A tremble of hope crossed her face. "And what if I ride to Paradise Valley?" Jackson smiled. "Then a man might find all kinds of reasons to stay home from time to time." Their hands met first, simple, trembling, honest. Then he kissed her. It was soft at first, a promise waiting for a future, but when she leaned into him, it deepened. 2 lonely hearts finding something neither had expected. When they parted, her eyes shined with emotion. "I didn't come west looking for love," she whispered. "Neither did I," he said. "But maybe this land gives more than it takes." She rested her forehead against his chest, and for the first time in years, Jackson felt whole. The next morning, they rode out with the escort. By the time they reached Willow Creek several days later, news was already spreading. Judge Hawkins had been arrested. Several miners, too. Families who feared losing their homes were safe again. Tabitha reopened the Willow Creek Chronicle. Folks welcomed her with open hearts, grateful for her courage and her brother's legacy. Jackson watched her from the doorway that first morning, ink on her hands, hope in her eyes. He realized then he didn't want to watch her walk away again. He wanted to walk beside her. The weeks that followed brought new rhythm to their lives. Jackson rode into town twice each week, sometimes with ranch supplies, sometimes with a small bouquet of wildflowers he picked himself. Tabitha rode out to the CCC on Sundays, bringing warmth to a house that had been too quiet for too long. One day, she began planting flowers where Jackson's mother's garden once stood. He watched her kneeling in the dirt, her hair catching the sunlight, and felt something bloom in him too, something he thought had died the night his family was taken. Love. By autumn, their bond had deepened into something strong and steady. The valley was healing after the drought. The Triple C was thriving again. And Tabitha's newspaper was giving the territory a voice it had never known. On a crisp October evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Jackson led Tabitha to the porch of the Triple C. Golden leaves blew across the yard. The horses grazed in the fading light. "Tabitha," he said, his voice low and sure, "I spent years building my father's ranch, but never a life." He took her hands gently. "Until you." Her eyes softened. "I came west seeking my brother's legacy, and I found mine." Jackson pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a tiny diamond that caught the light just so. "I can't promise the frontier won't take from us again," he said, "but I can promise we'll face whatever comes together, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes. "Nothing would make me happier." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him. Their kiss sealed the promise of a shared future. They married in November, in a small church filled with ranchers, storekeepers, and townsfolk who had followed their story through Tabitha's writing. Afterward, they returned to the Triple C, where Mrs. Blackburn cried tears of joy, and Miguel declared it the best thing that ever happened to the ranch. Winter passed into spring. Flowers bloomed again in Catherine's garden, named after Jackson's mother. One morning, Tabitha took Jackson's hands and placed them over her stomach. "I'm expecting," she whispered. The world seemed to stop. Then joy hit him so hard it stole his breath. "Tabitha," he said, his voice breaking, "you've given me everything I thought I'd lost." "And you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go," she said. "Now we build our home together." They stood in the garden, the sun warming their faces, the mountains watching over them. Jackson kissed her forehead and pulled her close, his heart full. He once believed love had no place on the frontier. Now he knew the frontier was the very place love was meant to bloom. Because sometimes offering someone shelter brings you the home your own soul was searching for.